As David mentioned, my name is Justin Skagen. I am the VP of Revenue Integrity and Operational Compliance for a company called Arrivia. It's really a fancy way of saying that anything that deals with revenue, I stick my nose into and kind of piss everybody else off. I'm also a certified fraud examiner through the ACFE. And that's just, again, another fancy way of saying that I love fraud and I've been trained in how to detect fraud. And I will start off by saying, yes, that is my quote up there. And so a little bit about me. When I was younger, when kids wanted to be police officers, firefighters, doctors, whatever, I wanted to be a criminal. It was exciting, right? Like it seemed like it was fun. And the reason being, and it goes with my little picture there, so I fell in love with this movie called Hudson Hawk. It's a movie with Bruce Willis in it. Very campy, cheesy movie. But Bruce Willis plays an art thief in the movie. And he just gets released from jail and then he gets suckered back into doing another heist once he gets back out. And it's just a lot of campy, zany fun. And as a child, seeing that, I was like, that looks really cool. I like art. He's an art thief. Therefore, this seems like it should be fun to do. But as I grew up, everybody told me crime doesn't pay, which I feel like that might be a lie now. It seems like, the more notorious you are, you get movies, you get documentaries, you get to be on Dancing with the Stars, all sorts of fun things that, you wouldn't normally expect for criminals to be able to get. But that kind of what led me through my journey, though. So as I continued to get older and everything, I took forensic science, eventually wanted to be a forensic scientist and work within law enforcement. That didn't pan out the way I wanted it to. I moved into the private sector and started with my company, Arrivia. I originally started on the phones and then moved into the revenue integrity department from there. And for me, that was kind of my calling. At that point, I wasn't a criminal, but now I was moving into a realm where I could think like a criminal, act like a criminal, get paid to do it, and not get in trouble for it. So, no downside. So, a little bit about Arrivia. So, we're a white label travel agency. We've been around for about 20-ish plus years. Originally started out in the timeshare space, where if you owned a timeshare, you'd be able to trade in your timeshare week, and we would give you a cruise to go on a nice, fantastic cruise vacation. Since then, it's expanded. We moved into being a full-blown travel agency, offering air, car, hotel, resorts, everything that you can imagine under the sun as far as vacation goes. And from there, kind of a good example of it, we moved into the loyalty space, and one of our partners, Spirit. So we actually just brought them on, super excited about that. And what we do for them is we allow them to use your loyalty points, right, that you get from spending using your Spirit card. When you book travel, you come into our platform. I forgot what I was going to say. Sorry. So you come into our platform, and we act as the merchant of record. And since we have over 2,100 employees globally, that opens us up to a lot of different levels of risk, right? This allows, one of our employees could potentially, use your credit card information. They could use your loyalty points to book their own vacations. Unfortunately, yes, it does happen, but that's why I exist, right? To catch these guys. And with that, we have to kind of understand the fraud, and to be able to catch these guys, we really need to understand, how do they think? How do they move? What do they do? How are they going to act? A long time ago, a bunch of fraud fighters came up with what's called the fraud triangle. And they broke it down into 3 components of why fraud exists, why fraud happens. First one is being the opportunity. So is the opportunity present there for somebody to be able to commit fraud? And that could just be, maybe nobody's watching. Or it could be maybe you accidentally did something and realized that nobody caught it, and so therefore you continue to do it, so on and so forth. So that's where the opportunity comes in. Motive. Motive by far is the easiest one. Most motives is driven by some type of monetary gain, right? Either, in our case, a free vacation because you don't have enough money to be able to pay for your own vacation. Maybe you're going to sell something, which I'll talk about here in a little bit. But there's always some kind of drive to it. Nobody just suddenly wakes up and says, I'm going to commit fraud just because, right? There's always something there to it. Lastly is the rationalization of it. And this is actually kind of the most interesting part. I don't know if too many people are aware of a guy who used to be called Tipper X. He did an insider trading fraud scheme way back when. But I got to listen to him talk, and one of the things that he said is he rationalized his fraud by saying it was a victimless crime. Right? There was no victim in this. And I really paid attention to that. And as I've interviewed some of the people at our company that we've identified the internal fraud with, I asked them, why did you guys do it? And a lot of times they say the same thing. We felt like it was going to be victimless, right? The company has enough money to cover this. If we use a customer's benefits, the company's going to pay for that. Like, it's going to go back to them. They're not out anything. But to us, there is no victim. Other times we do hear the whole piece of, well, it's owed to me. I work really hard. I feel underappreciated at my company. So I'm rationalizing me doing this action because I feel like it's owed to me by the company. So, getting into the meat and potatoes of everything, like how did we get connected with Teramind? So we were actually doing an investigation that was actually completely separate for the reason why we actually linked up with Teramind. So we were going through an investigation where we noticed that there had been some fraudulent hotel bookings made on a bunch of members' accounts. And as we were going through it, we're looking through everything that we're going into our CRM and looking at the actions that had taken place in the CRM. We noticed that a couple of agents' names were on changes within the accounts. Like they were changing the names that were on the accounts, they were changing phone numbers, they were changing email addresses. They were changing a bunch of information to kind of hide what they were doing. So we brought those folks in and said, hey, listen, like the members that called in, they say they don't recognize the people that have made these bookings. They didn't use the points. What's going on? Why is your name all over these accounts? First thing they said was, well, we shared our passwords with other people, which, if you're in IT or cybersecurity, that's a huge no-no, right? Like, you don't share your credentials with anybody. And so, we told them, they're like, hey, like, what are you doing? Like, you can't share your credentials. Like, that's just, why would you do that? Now look what's happened. Even though you shared your credentials and you're saying it's not you, you're still responsible because it's under your name. As they heard that, well, they do like, most thieves do, no honor amongst thieves. They started throwing everybody under the bus. It was this person. It was that person. This person did it over here. Yes, I might have done this one, but they're the ones that told me how to do this. It was just left and right. But they did throw out one name that seemed to be really interesting, and so we started digging into that person. And as we were looking into it, we noticed that this individual had a high number of views on accounts. All right, so we're going through, some of our information from the data warehouse and everything to pull all this up, and we're like, man, why does she have almost 10 times, 20 times most other agents for views on accounts? Like, this doesn't make sense. And keep in mind, she got thrown into the mix because of this hotel booking piece. And as we're looking at it, we're also noticing there's no hotel bookings, there's no any travel booked on these accounts. What is going on? Like, why? And as we continue to go through it and continue to dig through it, we started assuming why this was going on, but we couldn't really prove it. And what we assumed was going on was that this person was building lead lists, and they were going to then sell these lead lists to another party. Now, I will say this was in our Mexico office, and one thing that Mexico is known for is cartels. And what we've learned is, what the cartels were actually doing down in Mexico is they would approach some of the timeshares down there, call centers down there. They would approach employees and offering them cash to build lead lists for them. And typically every lead that they had, they would give, maybe 50 cents, right? Maybe $1 for every lead that they got. But then they would call these leads. The cartel folks would call these leads. And this is actually, found this out through the FBI, that this is actually one of the top ways that cartels make money currently, is by doing this scam where they call out to you and say, hey, if you want to get out of your timeshare, we're going to buy it from you. We'll pay you $100,000, $150,000 to sell your timeshare to us. You're free of it. You don't have to worry about it anymore. And you get to make some money. That sounds like a good deal, right? I mean, a lot of these people probably purchase their timeshares around like $50,000, maybe $60,000, right? So they're coming out way ahead. So they're like, yeah, I want to do that, I want to do that. And then what they say is, well, there is a fee for this. Think of it like a closing cost fee, like when you're buying a house, right? So there's a fee for this. Usually they start about like $5,000. And so you say, okay, that's fine, right? I'm fine with paying that. You're going to give me $100,000. Sometimes they'd even sweeten it up and say, we'll give you that $5,000 back. So instead of getting $100,000, you're getting $105,000 back. So yeah, you're like, all right, cool. I'll give you that $5,000. A couple of weeks goes down the road. You hear back from them again, hey, there was some issues, with the government. There are some additional fees to this. We need more money. And they keep doing this cycle until that person finally says, all right, I have no more money, or I'm now realizing that this is a scam. Usually it's done over wire, so it's not as very easy to be like, hey, I'm just going to charge this back. Like once that money's gone, it's gone, right? So that timeshare owner now very upset, understandably, right? I mean, they just got bilked out of thousands of dollars. They got nothing for it. So they're very upset. So what does the cartel do then? They circle back to that person, and they say, hey, we found your information. There was a scam call center that was raided. Your information was in there. We're going to help you get it back. And he's like, hey, yeah, I want my money back, like whatever you got to do. And they're pretty sophisticated with this. They create fake IDs, like fake lawyer IDs and everything. They have fake government documents. They have fake telephone numbers that if you call up, like they'll answer, this is legal, so-and-so, blah, blah, blah. But they go through all that with you, and like you get really excited because, okay, I'm going to get my money back. I'm going to get some kind of justice. And then they hit you with well, there's a government fee for this. So now you got to pay us more money. So they're just going through these people and just cycling back and going through and going through and going through and just like getting more and more money, right? And so that's what our fear was with this person going through all of these accounts. But we had no way to really truly prove it, right? We just had conjecture. Like all we could think of was like, yeah, we assume that you're doing it, and you know what they say about assuming, right? So all we could do is assume. Now, in Mexico, they have very different labor laws. You can't just terminate somebody without cause. Like, even though we felt we had cause, but if we couldn't prove it, that's technically without cause. And if we were to term them, we either have to pay out a very heavy severance, or they could potentially turn around and sue us. And then we would end up paying out a lot of money. So the last thing that we want to do is pay a fraudster money to get them out of our system, right? So we're just like, okay, we can't do that. And we're just, like this says, hitting a wall. No, we were banging our heads against the wall, trying to figure out, like, how do we do this, right? Because there was a lot of accounts that this person was going through. We're really trying to figure it out. So we reached out to our cybersecurity department and our IT department, which, by the way, if I have any cybersecurity folks in here or IT folks, if you guys have a CFE at your company or internal auditors, I highly encourage you guys to actually get with them and meet with them, because that synergy between both groups can actually do like a whole lot of good damage within the company to actually prevent insider threat. But we reached out to them, and we do work with them quite closely. And we're asking them, can you guys pull us down all the Teams messages? We need, this person's Outlook inbox. We need you to pull their OneDrive, which that part was going to be a nightmare. I don't know if anybody's ever had to sift through hundreds of Excel documents to look through data and find hidden data and all that stuff. It's terrible, and it takes forever. And so we weren't really looking forward to that, but we needed the information. Downside was this was going to take time, right? Like, this wasn't going to be a quick thing. It was probably going to take at least 2 weeks to get the data, probably another week to go through it all and sift through it all and find the evidence that we actually need, and then go and interview the person again to show them all the information. By that time, this lead list could be gone. All right, and we're talking, this is a large lead list. It's not something we'd want to get out. So we're just like, all right, like how can we speed this up? How can we speed this up? And this is where we got introduced to Teramind. We had one of our guys who worked in our workforce management department, And he came to us, and we'd reached out to him during this investigation for some other stuff. And he came to us and said, hey, like, I heard you guys are a little bit stuck. We're piloting this program. It's called Teramind. And it's a computer monitoring software. Like, would you guys be interested in taking a looking at it? Like, yes, we would. And so they brought us into the loop on this, but they gave us one caveat. They said, we only have this on 20 people. So we have 2,100 employees. They're only doing this on 20 people, and we need to find one person. Our odds were very, very low. But we struck gold. That one person who had been on there, that one person was part of the pilot. So once we got access to the tool, that was the first thing we looked for. Like, is this person here? We're like, yes, we have it. And then we started digging into the tool. And I'm not kidding when I say, like, this was literally like having God mode in a video game. We could see everything that this person was doing on their computer. We were looking at different times where she probably had her child on there and was like, they were playing Roblox, watching Disney movies, things like that. We're like, and we can see all this. Like, we're plain as day, like, as if it's our own screen, right? On top of that, we have all the other data in there. So we can identify every single application, every single website, how long they were on the website for. And we started piecing all those together, and we started looking at when they were accessing the CRM. You know, a lot of the access was after hours, which was, again, you know, one of our first clues that something nefarious was going on. But we started going in there, and we were able to actually sit there and watch this employee go into the account, sit there for a few seconds, copy the PII information, go into Excel and paste it into Excel. And we watched them do this multiple times. We actually got to see this employee also get a little bit trickier too, which would have made my life so much more difficult if I had to go through all these Excel files. She would not only copy and paste it into there, she would change the font to white, so that way it looked like nothing was in any of the cells, and then she would hide the tab. The likelihood of us finding that right away, very slim. Like, we would obviously notice that the Excel file has a large, like, file size, so there's got to be some kind of data there. But to dig through that and actually find that off of the OneDrive would have taken forever. You know, I'm very confident in my skills. I do a pretty good job. But that would have taken me forever if I didn't have this, right? So this also helped us with our IT department, right? Because now we knew what Excel file it was. So now we can say, hey, we need these files. Don't give me the whole hard drive. Just give me these files. So what would it take in, 3 to 4 weeks to fully investigate and handle with the employee? Now it took us about 2 days to do. Thankfully, with this, we're actually able to stop the file from even being sent out. We're actually able to go back and see when she first started to the time that we got rid of her, and we're able to identify that the file never got sent out. So we're actually able to protect the data, which was, for us, that's a game changer, right? From a fraud perspective, being able to see this information is major. Like David said, right at the beginning, 83% of companies are going to experience some type of internal threat. The majority of that, when you're talking about fraud, either doesn't get caught or gets caught months down the road, usually by accident, right? It's usually because your consumer called in and said it was upset because something, happened on their account, or somebody else, came across it by accident. So now we're moving into a completely different realm, being able to actually see these screens. Now we're getting into a realm where we can actually go in and be more proactive about preventing fraud, protecting our data, and keeping our systems more secure. So what we did is, once we saw this information, and we realized how powerful it was, and everything that we could see, like I said, we can see applications, we can see the websites, we can see IP information. Really cool, my favorite functionality, OCR, so we can actually put things into a search and we can see if it popped up on their screen at all. So that takes some of our investigations down drastically. Also helps with link analysis. We can stick like a member ID into there, and we can see all the different employees that maybe have accessed that account. Maybe they didn't actually go into the account, but it appeared somewhere on their screen, either through an Excel file. They accessed the front portion of the account without actually going into it. They were talking about it within a Teams message. So now we can see that, and we can start grouping together like anybody that may have accessed this account. So if fraud did occur, now we can see everybody that may potentially be involved. So with that, we took that on. We said, you know what, they're piloting this, and they've been, I think probably like 6 or 7 months already in the works of doing this. We're like, nope, we need this now. So we took it over, and within about another 6 months, we scaled it up to 1,500 employees. Now, why 1,500 when we have 2,100? One of the key reasons being different laws in different geos. Like Portugal, you can't monitor somebody's computer 24/7. So we have to continuously rotate them in and out. So there's no sense in buying licenses to have there for somebody that we're not monitoring, right? But we continue to build that out. Now, for us, yeah, again, world's greatest tool, right? Like I said, we can see everything. But that does come with challenges, right? Not everybody's going to want to adopt that. Now, for our department, we reported up in through the sales organization, which was a very weird organizational structure for us to read through sales, but that's the way that we reported. So that wasn't that big of a push on that side. But going into the corporate world, on the corporate side of everything, became a little bit harder, right? Because not everybody wanted to be monitored. Everybody had that sense of, okay, Big Brother is going to be watching us. Now we're going to get micromanaged, yada, yada, yada. So we really had to work to overcome that. And some of the other concerns were, if I'm in marketing, so if I'm in the SLT for marketing, I don't want somebody from development looking at my people. Or if I have 2 managers, I don't want one manager being able to see the other manager's department, then they start bickering back and forth at each other because the other person's employees aren't doing what they're supposed to be doing. So we had to go in and to set it up in such a way that everybody could only see their people, right? So we had to alleviate that concern. The other concerns that started coming up were HIPAA and PCI compliance issues, right? Because we're monitoring the computer. How many of you, do like your healthcare and stuff like that on your work computer? I know I do because it's the easiest and it's tied to my work email, right? So we had to worry about that. So we'll block out email. PCI, we'll block out payment screens. So we had to do a lot to really kind of build that trust with everybody that we're not going to be looking at sensitive information. We're not going to be using that information in any sort of shape or form. We also created a governance committee to also kind of help manage this. So when we do investigations, we'll have to go to this governance committee and say, hey, we need to move this person to what we call special projects. And what that does is, now again, like I said, we're blocking out payment screens, we're blocking out email, we move it into special projects, and that kind of opens it up for us during our investigation so we can see what's going on in those realms. Number one, that helps us not bug IT to go pull down Outlook and Teams messages and all that stuff. But it also gives us just a full scope within one system to be able to do it. But we have to go through this governance committee, which again helps kind of build that trust with everybody. We also communicate out to the company, and I'm sure a lot of your companies do this as well. We'll let you know that your computer is being monitored. Now, we don't necessarily tell you exactly the full scope of how it's being monitored, but it's being monitored. So with all that kind of helped alleviate some of the grumblings. I mean, they're still there, and they're always going to be there again because nobody wants to be monitored and stuff like that. But once we started really digging through it and going through it and explaining it to people and what the full capabilities were, people really started to adopt that. And some of those other pieces were, positive use cases. Again, for me, yeah, I use it for fraud. 90% of my use of this tool is going to be for some kind of negative reason because somebody's doing something they shouldn't be doing, and now I need to go after them for whatever it is that they're doing. But as we went through this, we did start noticing a lot of positive use cases for this. One of those use cases being like for productivity. one of the real strong ones that we still continue to use today and go through is helping with our service levels. We started noticing when we went in there that agents would be key pressing, right? To fake kind of being active and whatever, keeping their computers awake. And we started noticing this like quite a bit. Now, we did have some people doing it for nefarious reasons because they were trying to avoid work. And we handled that. But the other thing that we noticed is that we had a lot of employees that were just pressing on keys because they didn't have enough calls. They didn't have enough work. And they'd be 20, 30, 40 minutes in between calls. But then we look at some of the other departments, and they were just back-to-back calls. Sometimes 10-minute wait times, 20-minute wait times. And so what we started doing, the departments that had, the lower call volumes, like in their mind, they're like, okay, we're overstaffed. So we're going to start reducing heads. And we were looking at it, was like, well, no, like don't do that. Let's reskill these individuals to go into like these heavier call volume areas. And so that was like one of the big, use cases right there, because not only did that give employees the ability to, number one, not be bored, give them the ability to sell more, which improved their commissions, right? Which from my side, that reduces the risk of those employees committing fraud because now they're making more money. Helped our service levels with as far as the calls went, which put us in a better position with our brand partners. So we were using it, to kind of go through some of that. The other things that we would use it for is like we'd look at some of our top producers. And we have one in particular, and this guy is like an absolute beast when it comes to sales. Like he's been like the top guy for I don't even know how many years running. Like nobody's been able to outsell this guy. Like he's always been the top. But nobody really understood how he did it. So we actually started watching him, and we took his video screen through Teramind, and we matched that up to his calls. Now this guy was very methodical. He always said the exact same thing, exact same jokes, all the way through his calls, every single call, the exact same, and it worked. But we also, when we started looking at the screen in Teramind, we started noticing his patterns as he's actually moving through our applications. We would notice that he would always go into the application before he actually needed to get into it. He already knew what he was going to say, so he could move very quickly through it. And we started looking at some of the lower performers, and what we noticed is a lot of them, as they were going through their calls, they'd be trying to pull up the application as they needed it instead of beforehand. So, and as we know with technology, sometimes it's not the quickest thing in the world, especially when it's web-based. So we have these lower performers trying to pull something up, and while it's loading, they don't know how to fill that silence, right? So they're just lots of ums and ah, or just dead silence, which, I mean, in a sales world, that's going to kill your sales call, right? Like you don't want silence in there. You want to be able to continuously interacting. So we identified that, and we started building SOPs on how to navigate through calls and how to be more productive in your sales calls. Flipping kind of back to the fraud side, some of the positive use cases that we've been using for this, we've also used it to prove people innocent. We actually had one case where one of our members called in. They had just purchased a membership through us, a travel membership. Shortly after that purchase, his credit card got used at a Target. So he called in saying, I've never used this credit card except for with you guys. Now it's been used at Target. Your employee took my credit card information. So we're actually able to go through, and what we did is, again, we pulled up the phone calls. We pulled up Teramind, matched his screen up to the call. First thing that we did is we looked at when the payment information was taken. So in the call we can hear, or I shouldn't say we can hear because we do block that out for PCI as well, but we know exactly when he's giving the credit card information. We know how long it usually takes somebody to give a credit card. Matched it up to the screen, and as we watched through the screen, we could see him entering into the payment field. Again, it's blacked out on there, but we can see how long that he's in there for, right? He was in there just long enough to enter in the credit card information, and then he exited out of it. Now with our systems, it automatically redacts the credit card information. So there's no way for that employee to ever go back in there and re-see that credit card information. So right there, we knew the likelihood of him having written it down was very slim to none. If he would have written it down, what we would have seen is We would have heard in the call where it blanked out for the credit card information. But during that time, we would have seen, his screen not necessarily blanked out. And then him going in and finally entering the credit card information and going on from there. Like, it wouldn't have been a simultaneous thing if he was writing it down. No, that's not to say that, maybe he didn't, record it somehow or something like that on his phone or something, like a voice recorder or whatever. Very possible, but unlikely. So we're able to use that information. The other piece that we actually use, and we compared this to some of our other information, we use the IP address information. So Teramind gives us that information and tells us where somebody's located at. And we're able to look at it and say, okay, based on Teramind's information plus our own internal information, this individual is located in this area. Now, the store that it was used at was 4 hours away. Now, why you would drive 4 hours to go use a stolen credit card? I don't know. You might, right? But not likely. From there, what we also did is we said, okay, we know that this is where he's located at. The day that the card was used, we went into Teramind and looked down that specific day, and that employee was working that day. Called up Target, we got all the information. Target confirmed that the card had been swiped. They gave us a timestamp of when it was done, and it was 2 hours before the employee's shift. No way that employee is swiping that card and that Target and then making all the way back and on time for his shift. So we're actually able to take that information, use the screen recordings from Teramind, and talk to the cardholder and say, hey, our employee did not take your credit card information. Again, without the use of being able to see that, it would have been very tough for us to be able to handle that situation. Because in like one of those situations, you kind of have to side with that member, right? Like, you don't really want to upset your member too much. So potentially could have had to have, like, at least, the very least, suspended this employee until we finished our investigation. By using this tool, we were actually able to resolve it same day. Once we did, I think we did it probably about 2 hours from the time that the member called to resolving and then getting back on the phone with the member. But like I said, lots of positive use cases for this. Honestly, I'd probably go on for days with all the different positive use cases that we can do from this. But some of the other fun things that we've come across from my side of it is just random weird things that I don't even know why some of the employees would do this, like fraudulent sick leave. Like, we caught one person that was calling out sick, but they were going into their computer. They were purchasing their hotel booking on their computer, so we could see them purchasing it for the days that they called out sick. So they were really just going on vacation. But they didn't want to go through the proper steps of requesting the time off and making sure that it was actually approved and doing all that. They just said, you know what, I'm going on vacation, and I'm just going to do it. So that was a fun one to do. Fake system issues. So this is where, from an IT perspective, Teramind gets really interesting as well, kind of going back to some of those positive use cases. With the fake system issues, agents will call up and say, hey, my telephone system, it crashed, and that's why I keep getting disconnected from members, and I'm having all these problems. And we'll go in and we'll look at it and be like, no, you hit the disconnect button repeatedly on every single one of these customers, like you had 0 issues. But on the flip side of that, we do, like I said, going back to the positive use case, we do allow our IT employees to actually use this system as well to help troubleshoot some of these issues, right? If it's a legitimate issue. Being in the IT world, having to reproduce an issue is difficult sometimes, right? Especially when you're dealing with, either sales agents or people who aren't very tech savvy. That gets kind of difficult because you're like, okay, I need to know how to reproduce this. What were you doing before, during, and after when this issue occurred, right? A lot of times they're like, I have no idea what I was doing, but I just know that it crashed. And sometimes it's, a day or two later when they're just like, oh yeah, by the way, I had this issue, right? So as an IT person, you're like, I have no way to reproduce this. And when I try to do the steps that you told me, it's working fine for me. So with this tool, what they can actually go in and do is now look at that individual and they can say, oh, here's what happened. Here's where everything was going on. Here's the error message that popped up for you. And better yet, Teramind gives you the timestamp of when it occurred. So now you can actually take that timestamp and go back into your system logs to get a better understanding on the back end of why this error actually occurred to actually resolve it. With that, that's another way that you can also build trust with the employees, right? Because there's nothing worse than when employees are reporting issues and IT looks at it and says, I can't reproduce this. Doesn't look like there's an issue. And they keep reporting it and they keep getting no help. So with this, now the IT folks are actually able to get in there and fix these issues, which makes the employees happy. Last one, manipulating time tracking. So we had an individual that was going through, and she would leave work early, sometimes 2-3 hours early, go pick up her daughter from school or whatever she needed to do, or go run her errands, get back to her house. When it was time for her to be off work, she would then clock out, via either her cell phone or some other personal device, which we don't track those. So we have no idea to be able to say for sure exactly what device she was using, but we know it wasn't her work computer to clock out. And then she'd also come in late, but somehow she'd always be clocked in on time, but then not show up for, an hour or 2 hours into the office. So we started looking into it, and what we started noticing is she was just manipulating her time. She would leave work early. Sometimes she'd even forget. And then she would reach out to her supervisor and have her supervisor actually change her time card for her. So that way she would get paid for her full hours. So again, without the use of, this type of tool, we would have really truly caught that. It would have looked weird to us. We could go back and we could look at cameras and things like that to start piecing it together. But again, that would have taken so much more time. This way we were able to look at it very quickly, knock it out, have the discussion, correct the behavior, and be able to move forward from there. All right, and then lastly here, some of the key takeaways for us. Number one, behavioral analytics are absolutely 100% essential. Understanding what your employees are doing, how they're doing it, and why they're doing it is just an absolute essential need that every company should have. Employee trust. This, in my opinion, is probably the biggest one, right? From a risk perspective. The more trust that your employees have in your company, the less likely they are to do something that they shouldn't do. It's going to help them, number one, be better, be more productive. Like I said, mitigate that risk. So building trust is key to, and just in general, not even looking at it from a perspective of software monitoring or anything like that. Just in general, building that trust with the employees is going to be key. Then lastly, I guess this has been my favorite one since I do fraud and I love fraud, is the risk mitigation, right? Having real-time data to actually be able to mitigate the risk, right? Being able to move from a reactive stance to a proactive stance. That is a game changer. Like I said, most of the time, fraud doesn't get reported until months down the road, if it even gets caught at all. Now we're in a point now where we can say, we can identify, we've learned some of these behaviors, we've learned some of these patterns. Now we can build out some of these alerts and everything that we need to now move into a more proactive stance. Now, can we stop it, prior to Minority Report? No. But we can get close, right? We can actually finally catch this and be able to stop it before any major harm is done. And on that note, any questions?